relationships are very tricky things. It goes from love and care to sometimes we're like, I really don't know if I want to stay in this relationship. And it's not just love relationships, it's friendships. It's even the relationships with your family, especially your family at times. And knowing when to let go can be a difficult one, but that's what we're going to talk about today, knowing when to let go of relationships. Check it out. Hey, everybody, and welcome back to the Positivity Experience. It's your girl, Lori, and I'm excited that you're here. It's my birthday. Today is my birthday. You might not be listening to it on the 7th, but it is my birthday, and I'm so excited for it to be my birthday. Happy to live another year. It's really funny how, when you're younger, you're just like, I'm going to party, I'm going to do all these things, and as you start to get older, you're like, man, I did it. I got around the sun another year, and I think that that's a really important one for you because you're here, and I'm glad to be here and I'm glad that you're here with me. So yes, we're celebrating my birthday together and we have a relationship, right? So knowing when to get out of a relationship of any type is going to be extremely important to you. And sometimes you are always second guessing yourself too. You're like, is it me? And it could be you. And we'll talk about that. Is it me, or am I falling in love with an idea of how I want this relationship to be? Am I glorifying it? All of those things. And over on Patreon, there's going to be a worksheet, a very helpful worksheet that's going to help you identify your relationships across the board and kind of weigh your options on how important those relationships are, and not important, how healthy are those relationships for you. It's going to be really important. And then if you're actually on the abundance tier, you guys get a bonus episode in the abundance tier on Patreon. Once a month, and there's going to be a really good episode over there. But if you're in the abundance tier, you'll have to wait to see what that is. But it's going to be very, very helpful, and it's going to continue to promote this topic across the board. So you're going to get 3 if you're in the abundance tier. But let's jump. Oh, and if you want to do that, go to patreon.com/the positivity experience. So let's jump into that about relationships. Again, it's a very tricky thing. Think about, let's say, love relationships, right? Here you are, you're walking down the street, you're a person, they're a person. You're like, oh, a little attraction there. What's going on? Oh, this is great. You decide, let's get together. Let's try this out. Maybe you're going to procreate. Maybe you're going to move on forward. But sometimes those relationships don't remain a healthy one for you. And you may not remain a healthy one for someone else. That doesn't mean that there's something wrong with you. And it's important that you understand it's not just about when you want to release relationships. Sometimes it's about they want to release it too. And you don't have to love it, right? Because there's going to be things that maybe they just can't get past. Maybe they're on a different path of their life. Maybe they have just totally changed it up and they've decided a relationship isn't for them. You're allowed to be hurt by it, by the way, but they have a right to make that determination. So let's talk about some things that may surface for you when you're evaluating the quality of these relationships. If you feel drained and you feel that there's constant negativity, it's constant toxicity, there's criticism all the way across the board. You can't do the dishes right. You can't do the laundry right. You're going too slow at this. You don't spend enough time. You don't do all of these. Now listen, some of that is very valid to sit down and have a discussion. Hey, I really am feeling some kind of way, right? I'm feeling, not you're not doing, not you're making me feel. No human makes you feel anything. It's how we perceive it. I feel as though I'm doing a lot around here, and I really want to talk to you about some balance here. Okay, that's not criticism. That's communication. They may or may not be receptive of this. And that's the other side of that, right? If you feel as though now again, your delivery. If you're yelling at them, if they're saying if you're saying you don't, you do, you don't, you do, anybody is going to put their back into a corner. They're going to feel backed into a corner, and it's going to be problematic. So even if you're trying to have a productive conversation, your delivery is going to be something that you're going to have to check yourself on. This is why you don't let all those little annoyances fester, because then it's like somebody put the cap on the ketchup wrong and it is World War III in your house. That being said, not everything is an issue. Now I'm talking specifically about love relationships, so really in friendships too. But you're not going to find a person who is going to check every single one of your boxes. Oh, you might think you do in the beginning. Everybody thinks they do in the beginning, and then real life happens. So this is why understanding and evaluating pretty frequently what your non-negotiables are, right? They should be a smaller list than your negotiable list, right? You may say, I really want somebody tall. And it might be somebody who's your height, maybe even a little shorter, but they are kind. They are just really involved with you. They have an amazing heart. You can tell that they're a really good person. They have such good path for themselves, and they want to bring you on that path. Well, usually height may be a desire, but is it really a non-negotiable? And if it is, that's fine. But my point to that is there's non-negotiables and negotiables. You have to get clear on what it is. Because if you don't really know yourself, most of your relationships are going to feel toxic because you're expecting them to sort of read your mind. You're expecting them to know, and then you might change it up. What if you're dealing with depression and anxiety? You might change that up on a regular basis. You might need this today and not tomorrow. They may or may not be able to tolerate that, and that's okay too. But if you're feeling constantly criticized, you're fat, you're lazy, you need to do more. Like if you're constantly being criticized, it is most definitely time to exit that relationship. And quite honestly, if they feel the same way, it's time for them to exit that relationship. So you got to stop falling in love with this fantasy world of what you think that relationship could be. This could be this way. If I could just get them to do these things and these things, I could mold them. No. So that's why sometimes they may exit and they don't have to really coddle you through it, and you don't have to coddle them through it. Because usually if you've been constantly criticized, most of the times you've had a discussion about this. Okay, you've had a discussion and perhaps it's fallen upon deaf ears. Same with manipulation. Is there a level of manipulation in this specific relationship? And we're going to talk about family too. But is there, in this love relationship, is there a level of manipulation? Is somebody withholding sex? Is someone saying, well, if you go out with your friends tonight, I'm going to go out with my friends tomorrow, but not in a kind way like, hey, go out and have a great time. You know what? Tomorrow, me and the girls, we're going to go to paint night and have some wine. That's totally different. But if you're keeping score and you're saying, well, but I have a headache and I don't feel good. Well, they don't have to stay home because you have a headache. And so you have to understand, am I using manipulation? Now let's really transfer that over to friends and family. Okay. Oh goodness. Yeah. I see this so much. And I don't mean someone who is going to be a little sad that you're not showing up. That's fine. But it's when they try to guilt trip you, this is a problem. Okay. Every now and again, you know what? Everybody's going to kind of tiptoe a little bit into that guilt world, but don't let that be the standard. Let that be the absolute exception that you discuss and you directly address it. And then that's it. But if your mom, let's say we're going to use mom or a sibling or whatever, says to you, well, but why would you not come over? You know how bad I want you here, right? Like I even made your favorite cake and now you're not coming. That is toxic. That is negative. That is manipulative. That's manipulative because you're trying to guilt someone into showing up. Why would you want to do that in the first place? So you're content with them showing up, but if they don't want to be there, they're just there out of pity. They're there out of misery. So then you're upset too. You're like, oh, well, you're not being really participatory. Well, I guess not because I don't want to be here in the first place. So if family and friends are doing this to you on a regular basis and you've addressed it in a direct manner, right? Example of that, Mom, I'm not coming. And the way that this is being presented to me, I feel as though it's manipulative. And the next time that this happens, I'm going to distance even further. Right? Do you see if this then this? Remember, boundaries must carry consequences. However, the person has to know the boundaries. I've been on the receiving end where there was some weird boundary that I didn't know about and somebody got upset that I was never told, right? And that I know that that's happened to you, or maybe you've done that to other people. You've assumed, well, I do it this way, they should do it this way, or they should just know what my boundaries are. That's not how life works, right? Because any form of emotional or physical abuse, it is most definitely time to get out of that relationship in any fashion. You have to remember, going back to family, they're relatives. Stop mixing relatives and family together. They are not always the same thing. Family does not have to be someone who is a relative. And relatives don't have to be family. So when you are putting them on this different pedestal, you're like, well, I mean, these are my boundaries with Bob down the street, but my boundaries with mom, should they be different? Your boundaries shouldn't be different for anybody. Boundaries are set across the plane. You got to stop babying it, because what's going to happen is now you're mad at mom. Now you're mad at your sister. Now you're mad at these people because they're so toxic. They're considered a narcissist, or they're going through something and you're mad. Well, be mad because you know who you're dealing with. So those are some really good signs if it's constantly negative, if you're constantly feeling drained, if you're constantly sad, anxious. You can be around people and you're like, oh my God, I got to walk on eggshells. Oh God, what is this going to look like? So you can literally do this. And then it can also be very negative. If you're feeling negative, the constant chronic complainers, anybody, the spouse, the friend, whoever's it, I don't mean just calling and saying, hey, do you have a couple minutes to talk? Because you always want to ask the person if they're available versus just picking up the phone or walking in the door and just dumping it all over everybody, because they might not be in a space to hear that. So if you're around somebody who's always pessimistic and they're negative on a regular basis, you're going to want to really say, do I want to contribute to this? And if you do and you get irritated, that is not a them issue. That is a you issue. So if you can't accept the person that you're dealing with for being who they are and you get irritated, it's not them anymore. It's you. Do not ever hold on to a relationship for the sake of saying, I have somebody in my life. Don't do that. And don't let somebody go, well, you'll miss your mom when she goes. Of course you will. But that doesn't mean that you sacrifice your peace and go over there on Sundays, every Sunday, and you're a misery. No, that's not what that means. And same thing with a love relationship or a friendship, right? You got to know what kind of friend you can be and what kind of friend you need, right? I am very much I don't necessarily need to be checked in all the time. I don't need to be included all the time. And I'm honestly not going to do the same with you. And that has to work well on both ends. And I'm fortunate to have a handful of people, probably 7 people, which I think is kind of a lot, that I can say that I don't have to talk to them for months if I don't want to. And we pick right back up. I can hang out with somebody and nobody gets their feelings hurt about, well, I'm not included or you haven't talked to me in a while. But you have to know that about yourself. So then you're not creating some weird expectation on them and then they're disappointed in you because you're not calling in. And with a friendship or even a relationship of any type, you really want to address that early on. Hey, this is what I need in this friendship. Okay, now we're talking about friends. This is what I need in this friendship. This is what, I really like a hands-on friend. I really want to spend a little bit more time with that friend. And that's fine. But you got to know, are you capable of doing that? And are they capable of doing that in return to you? Because I'm not going to respond to you right away. If I'm doing something, I'm just not gonna. And if you need an immediate response, then maybe we're not meant to be in any type of a relationship, but we can keep a good acquaintanceship and be okay with that. Okay. And that's that lack of mutual respect. If there's not a mutual respect, then it's going to be problematic. And that is respecting boundaries. Again, boundaries must carry consequences, and you must articulate the boundaries and not assume that somebody knows what these boundaries are. And that's the big one. A lot of times you go, people are overstepping a boundary and you've just simply said, well, don't do that again. That's not a boundary. I've talked to you about this. If this, then this. But you got to also be willing to establish the consequence, articulate that consequence, and follow through with that consequence. So if you tell a sister, I don't allow myself to be spoken to that way. And if, okay, so we know that what you don't want, if this, then this. And if that continues, I'm definitely going to be blocking you and we're going to have some distance. Call it aggressive, that is assertive, and that is boundaries. What boundaries is not is just don't do this. Please don't do this. Please don't say this. Please don't do. That's not what boundaries are. And you got to remember that. Vice versa, it's the same thing. So if someone says to you, hey, if this, then this, and then you keep pushing and then they say, okay, we're done. Well, that's on you. So sometimes you have to clarify. And I realize that that's some things that I've had to change throughout my life is I've had to clarify, wait, is this a boundary? Because then you'll get accused of overstepping a boundary that you never knew was a boundary in the first place. because they put it in their head, or sometimes they'll distance. They'll sort of kind of ghost out a little bit, and it leaves you a little confused. So then you check in, and then maybe they lose their mind because you checked in because you overstepped a boundary. And so that's the things that you got to remember, is knowing what the consequences will be with your boundaries and how you can respect somebody else's. I've said this a lot. It isn't just about how you want to be treated in the home. It's how they respect your time with your friends, with your independent time. If in fact someone is constantly controlling, well, what do you mean you're going out with her? She's a hoe. Don't go out with her. What? They let them feel some kind of way, but you do not sacrifice your peace and your friends who were there, by the way, before this person, or even if they weren't. But especially if they were there before this person doesn't get to come in and start going, well, you shouldn't hang out with this person. This is a red flag. This is a red flag. And sometimes you'll see that if one person has a lot of friends, and they may not, or they may not need that, but you need that, they will not know how to respond to that. It causes a level of dissonance. And so then they'll start trying to change that narrative. Okay. And they'll go, well, I don't like this. Well, that's not okay. That's okay to not like it. It's not okay to push that perspective and those expectations onto somebody. Why? It's manipulation. That is hardcore manipulation. And so that's why you have to say early on in a relationship. And again, by the way, people change. How you were at 20 is usually very different at 30 and very different at 40. And now sometimes it isn't for people, but usually what you loved at 20, like I just said about my birthday, 20 to even 35, it was like, this is my month. I'm going to celebrate. I'm going to party. I want all of these things. Like it's just, and then now I'm just like, hey, I'm just happy to hang out with some friends and family and eat some dinner, like, and go maybe see a movie, you change. And it's funny because that's what happened in my first marriage, right? Guy is great. He's the biological father of my son, even though Paul has pretty much raised him. And he's a great dude. Like our family went to his wedding, and he is a better guy for his wife now and better father for his two kids, his twins that he has. But we grew differently. When I had Bugsy, that's his nickname. That's not his real name, but he's been Bugsy since he was months old. So with Bugsy, when I had Bugsy, I started to want to change some of the lifestyle in which we were living. I was in the music industry, and it was a very much party scene, and you were always out and you always did these things. And even when we had Bugsy in the beginning, he could go to his grandmother's house, and we could still go do our thing. Well, after a while, I'm like, it's really not. Like I still love doing those things, but I also want to not sometimes. And he wasn't there yet. He didn't want to get out of that lifestyle. I could try to force that, but why would I do that? That's going to breed resentment. If you try to force someone to make a change, it will breed resentment on their end. I don't care if they change. It will breed resentment. They will get upset. They will throw it in your face if they changed and they did all of that. And so it's not growing above, it's growing apart. And that is going to happen. If you think you're always going to remain on the same page, there's a delusion there. But sometimes you could still stay in that, and there could be a level of understanding. And by the way, we're also talking from the age of 25 to 32. I was not in this headspace, nor was he. And I think that plays a part in it. What kind of tools do you have? Are you in attachment? Are you in a certain level of expectation? And I literally, and even my son said, Mom, I love that he's a better dad to them because he had Paul. Paul helped raise him. There's no malice. There's no, why didn't you do this? Because he didn't have the tools to do it. We grew apart, and it was time to let that relationship go. Okay. You got to let things go that aren't good for you. And quite frankly, aren't necessarily good for the other person. Because very often, if you feel that person is a little toxic to you, there's a good chance that you're a little toxic to them, whether you want to admit it or not. It doesn't matter. It's just facts of how relationships work. And if you find that they're dismissive of the things that you want to do, hey, I'm going to go play pickleball. I don't know why that's so dumb. Listen, you can always say, hey, that's stupid, or I don't feel like going. That's fine. But when they become dismissive and go, well, do you really need to do that? Let's go do something else. And they almost like poo-poo it. You see this a lot from people who work from home. I'm fortunate that I don't have to deal with that with Paul. And I wouldn't deal with that with Paul, by the way. That would not fly. But a lot of times when people see that you work from home, they just assume that you have time. They assume that you're not doing anything. You have all of this flexibility. You're still working. If you're a stay-at-home parent, people assume that you're just chilling. You're just there. You get to stay in your pajamas. You do get to stay in your pajamas. However, you're working. It's one of the hardest jobs that you can do because you don't get a lunch break, right? You might sneak one in if somebody's napping or whatever. But so that's my point. If they're dismissive, manipulative, make you feel some kind of way, or you feel some kind of way that don't make you, then it's time to really distance from that. And that could also be a parent. Right? If a parent is going, well, I don't understand why you got to go play pickleball. All right, why don't you just come over? Let's go to lunch together. No, I'm going to play pickleball. Then if I feel accordingly afterwards, I'll call you and see if you want to go to lunch. Remember, people will dismiss things if they're not involved with it. How many times have you seen somebody who goes, that's so dumb, and then they try something and they're like, oh my God, it's fun. And you're like, yeah, I've been trying to tell you that. But you guys don't have to have the same likes, but you do have to mutually respect what each other are doing. So if you feel like, in my case, Paul, he plays a lot of golf. In the summer, he's golfing most of the time. He golfed a lot this weekend because it was decent weather. Yeah, that's going to happen. And there's not going to be a lot of independent time or couple time. And I'm okay with that because it makes him happy. It's what he needs. But if you feel that you need to have more interactions with your partner, your friend, your family member, articulate it, but just remember, just because you say that this is what you want doesn't mean that they have to give you that. They absolutely do not. And then you can decide the role in which they play in your life. Again, you fall in love with this idea that a human can make you happy. No, your parent can't make you happy. No, your friends can't make you happy. No, your spouse and children cannot make you happy. They can enhance your joy, enhance that wholeness. They are not doing that for you. You got to do that internally. So a lot of times you're holding on to relationships because you're like, oh gosh, like, oh my God, like, why I just need this. And maybe it was this way 10 years ago. And this person had quote unquote a midlife crisis. Some people call it a midlife crisis, and some people call it a pivot. It's how you see it. Maybe that person's tired of being in your life. You don't have to love it, but do you want somebody to stay in your life for the sake that you guys have been together for 20 years? So you say, well, we have all this time invested. Listen, it can be a pain in the ass. I'm not going to lie to you. To dismantle a relationship, especially if you have property together, if you have businesses together. Yes, it can be a pain in the ass. That is not a reason to stay in the relationship because you just don't feel like dealing with it. And don't expect someone to do the same. This goes back to that manipulation part. Well, we've been together for 20 years. Yeah. And probably the last 5 or 6 of those years was a nightmare anyway, or somebody was checked out. Stop trying to make people check in who are checked out, and stop trying to force yourself to check in when you're checked out. If you want to work on it, by all means, work on it. But do not allow yourself to hold on to a relationship for the sake of having a relationship, which goes into that different path and value. You got to be specific in what you like, and you have to remember that humans change. You change and humans change. And one thing I tell every client, no matter what country they are from, what race, what gender that they are born and identified with, it's the same. You will quote unquote, lose people on your healing journey. It's not really a loss. They were in there for a reason or a season, maybe not a lifetime. It's not a loss. You will move on from people, and this could be relatives. And this goes into being very careful of that relative's family connection. And what this highlights, if you're holding on to a relationship and you're like, well, yeah, I feel negative, but I don't know. And I don't know if I want to be on my own. Why? Why not? If you can't go be by yourself, then that's a problem. That's a problem, because that can go into attachment. That can go into codependency. That can go into self-loathing. That can go into self-esteem. If you're not willing to distance and walk into the unknown and stay in a relationship that you just feel is just, oh God, then you got to ask yourself why. It's a really good highlighting area to let you know, oh my gosh, I have attachment. Or this was comfortable. Do you know how many people I hear tell me it's because it's comfortable? I mean, that's kind of a human thing too. But if you're not willing to buck up out of that comfort zone, it's going to be a problem, because you're not going to grow. You're going to have goals you'll never meet. You're going to have friendships that you'll never have. You may even have relationships that you'll never have because you're staying in things that are pulling you down, that are weighing you down in quicksand. And if that's what you're doing, you're staying in this repetitive cycle. Now, the flip side of that is if someone, like I was saying earlier, is checked out and if they are ready to move on, it is allowed to hurt. You are allowed to hurt. You do not want to beg them. You don't want to manipulate them. You do not want to threaten them with self-harm. You do not do that. Threatening anyone with self-harm, if they don't stay, is the highest form of manipulation. And if someone does that to you, run in the other direction. And what they do is what they do. Do not ever feel obligated to stay in a relationship or make someone feel obligated to stay in a relationship because if not, they may harm themselves. That is the highest form of manipulation in a relationship. So it's the same, maybe it's not quite on that dramatic level with a parent, but they may pull out the whole, I'm not going to be here forever. Well, no, okay, I ain't going to be here forever. Manipulation on its highest level. So I want you to think of like, say, the top 3 relationships that you have. If they have distanced from you, that's okay. It may be something that they're going to build back with you down the road, but it's something that you have to demonstrate, and it's on their time on how you demonstrate it because maybe they distanced from you. Is it an expectation in which you've had on the relationship? Did you set out in a relationship, even from a parental relationship, on saying what you want it to be? You're allowed to want things to be different. You're not allowed to expect them to be different. And you're also not allowed to manipulate that situation to be different. So it's a good analyzation tool for you to look and go, am I getting more peace or more drama? The reality is this: no relationship's going to be perfect. Some relationships are going to have high levels of complaining at times. Listen, it isn't always good. You're not always going to be good yourself. So it isn't always going to be optimum, right? But that has to be limited versus it being the normal. Okay. If it's constantly, you feel negative and you feel drained and you feel sad and you feel like controlled, right? If that is more than, say, 50%, well, it shouldn't even be 50% of the time. So let me rewind that. If that's more than 25% of the time, maybe 30% of the time, you really want to reevaluate that relationship and stop giving people a pass because they are related to you. Stop giving people a pass on this, or for yourself, I should say. Stop giving yourself a pass to hold on to these relationships because you've been with this person for 20 years. You've been best friends with this person for 30 years. It doesn't matter. And you're allowed to mourn it. You're absolutely allowed to mourn it. Write them a letter. Don't send it. Write them a letter. Put your feelings out there. But they don't, you might feel, well, I feel as though I gave so much more to this relationship. Then it's probably good it's over. What did you learn from this relationship? What did you learn? And I don't mean you learned that person's an asshole. No. What did you learn? Did you articulate boundaries? Did you set boundaries? Did you have an expectation? Did you even check with yourself to say, what are my non-negotiables? If all those questions are no, or one of them is no, then you look at that and you go, okay, well, going forward, I have to be much more clear on what I want and how I articulate it. If you have a fear of conflict, it's going to be really hard for you to establish that. So every relationship, you're going to feel as though you're being taken advantage of because you keep giving, because you keep wanting people to change. So you'll feel taken advantage of, you'll feel empty because you have a fear of conflict. And if you can't demonstrate and tell somebody articulate and tell somebody what it is that you want and what you desire, and accept, this is the part, and accept that they may not give you the response in which you want, then you will stay in relationships and you're going to constantly think that you can't have a good relationship. And quite honestly, you won't have a good relationship with many people because you're not articulating what you need and you're not listening to what they need. So a lot of times we get caught up in ourselves. Well, this is what I want. This is what I see this a lot when people go, I don't understand. Like, I really like that person and they just don't seem like they like me. Yeah, but I like them. Well, okay. There's 2 people in this. If they don't like you, they don't like you that way. Okay, you got to be careful of the ego because the ego will come into play here. The ego is, but I want this, but I would do this. But there's 2 people in a relationship. So that's why, especially if it's a new relationship right now, ask them what they need And they may say, you know what? I really enjoy going hunting or golfing or something with my friends a couple days a week in the evening and a couple times on the weekends. Then you have to say, can I handle that? Don't tell yourself you can, and then you get mad, right? I tell you this all the time. There are so many people who go, oh my God, I met this person and they're so good. They have their own business. Man, they're working like 70 hours a week. They are really go-getters. Oh my God, I'm so excited. Same people 2 years later. I don't understand. All this person does is work. He's never home, or they're never home. They're always working. Yeah, you knew that from the get. But I mean, I have a baby now. Well, did you discuss that? Did you say, if I have a kid, are we going to spend more time together? Be ready for them to say no. So what you like about somebody, you don't get to throw that back up in their face later on and say, but I wanted it to be different. Then you should have said something. It's kind of like when somebody says, hey, you know what? I'm not really sure if I want kids. Okay. You're like, okay, well, I'm not sure if I do either. And now your couple, and even from a parent perspective, hey, are you going to have grandkids? I don't know. I'm not, well, I think you should have grandkids. Okay. Well, then you have them. Like, you know what I mean? Don't tell me what I need to do. But with a spouse or a partner, if in fact you say, I think I do want kids. I think I do want kids. And they're like, I don't. I've decided I don't want kids. Like, you guys are having a discussion. But I really want them. And I want you to have them. It's just not going to be with me. Don't ever force somebody to have kids because you want to have kids. Don't ever force somebody to live in a place that they don't want to live. That doesn't mean that you're going to be alone forever. It just means that that specific person and situation is not for you. So it's time to really analyze it. Parental perspective. Do you feel pressured? Do you feel any of those? Do you feel more unhappy when you are there than you don't? Then you're going to have to set boundaries, and you're going to have to say, hey, listen, I'm limiting interactions right now because I'm really working on myself, and this is not conducive to my growth. That's right. That's what you would tell a parent. Yes, that's right. That's what you would tell a spouse. Yes, that's right. That's what you would tell a friend. And if you're not willing to do that, then you're always going to be chasing a relationship that is never going to be good for you. And sometimes that means you might have to be alone for a while. And that's a good thing too. But holding on to it because you're afraid and well, I don't know if I could tell my mom that. Well, then go ahead. Just because you want it to be different isn't going to change it. Nothing will change until you change. If someone has been as their being for 65, 70 years of their life and you still are mad because they're not who you want them to be, it's not them, it's you. So take a good look at the relationships around you. Start to evaluate it. Start to look and say, am I being, manipulative and stuff like that? And then take a breath. Don't judge yourself. And then you want to act accordingly. And that's what we're going to talk about right now over on Patreon. Check it out.